There are two kinds of friends in this world, the ones who would help you move a body, and the ones who are the reason you need to. For 15 years, Luke was the first kind. He was more than a friend. He was a brother, the third leg of the stool that was my life. There was me, my wife Chloe, and Luke. We were a classic New York City cliché. Three inseparable souls against the relentless grind of the city. Our fortress a cramped two-bedroom apartment, and our sanctuary a sticky-floored dive bar in the East Village we called the office. That bar is where the story ends, so it's probably where it should begin. The air inside always smelled the same, a unique blend of stale beer, fryer grease, and the ghost of a million bad decisions. It was our place. Our last good memory was there, just a month ago. We were celebrating a small promotion for me at my architecture firm. We sat in our usual corner booth, the cracked red vinyl cool against our skin, laughing so hard that Chloe snorted beer out of her nose. I remember looking at her and Luke, their faces glowing under the neon sign, and feeling a profound sense of simple, unadulterated luck. It was a perfect, crystalline moment. Turns out it was also a perfect, well-rehearsed lie. Lately, though, things had felt off. There was a current of tension running just beneath the surface, a static hum I couldn't quite place. Luke had become quiet, moody. He'd bail on plans last minute, which wasn't like him. Chloe explained it away as stress from his freelance coding gigs. "He's just underwater, Ev," she'd say, rubbing my back. "We should do something nice for him." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Trust was the foundation everything was built on. Without it, you're just three strangers sharing overpriced drinks in a city that doesn't care if you live or die. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. The three of us were at the office, trying to recapture that laughing so hard you snort magic, but it wasn't working. The air was thick with unspoken things. Around midnight, claiming I had an early meeting, I said my goodbyes. As I stood up, Chloe smiled and said, "We'll just finish this last drink and be right behind you." Luke just nodded, refusing to meet my eyes. I walked out into the cool night air feeling vaguely unsettled, a low-level anxiety I couldn't shake. I got home, and as I went to put my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, my hand came up empty. I'd left them at the bar. No big deal. I pulled out my phone to text Chloe to grab them, but then I remembered. The AirTag. A gift from Chloe herself for my last birthday. "So you never lose anything again," she'd said. I opened the Find My app. A little blue dot pulsed on the screen. But it wasn't at the bar. It was moving, heading south, deeper into the city. Strange. Maybe one of them picked them up and was heading to another spot. But then, the dot stopped. It hovered over the rooftop of a sleek boutique hotel in Soho, a place I'd never been in my life. And just as that cold, sick feeling began to bloom in my gut, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. The words glowed on my screen. A perfect digital lie. "Hey babe, just finishing up with Luke. Don't wait up." For a solid 10 minutes, I just stared at my phone. A silent witness to a lie so blatant, so utterly contemptuous of my intelligence. It felt like a physical blow. The two glowing dots on the screen, the hotel in Soho, and Chloe's loving text, formed a map of my new reality. The architect in me couldn't help but appreciate the structure of the deception. It was clean, efficient, and built on the assumption that the foundation, my trust, was unbreakable, a fatal design flaw. I didn't storm out. I didn't drive to the hotel. My anger wasn't hot, it was cryogenic. It froze everything inside me into a state of perfect, crystalline clarity. An emotional demolition requires a plan, not a tantrum. I went into the living room, our living room, and looked around. Every object was now an artifact from a different life. The throw blanket Chloe had bought because it was so hygge. The framed concert poster from a show we'd seen with Luke. The whole apartment felt like a museum exhibit titled "The Life of a Fool." An hour and a half later, the lock clicked.
Chloe walked in alone, humming softly. The performance was flawless. She feigned surprise at seeing me awake. "Oh, you're still up. I thought you'd be asleep." She leaned in to kiss me, but I took a step back. That was the first crack in her composure, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Everything okay?" I didn't answer. I just held up my phone, the Find Me app, still open, the blue dot of my keys still mockingly pulsating over that hotel. "I left my keys at the bar," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "You gave me this AirTag so I'd never lose them. But it looks like you lost them for me." Her face went through a rapid series of calculations. Denial, justification, blame. Denial won. "What? That's crazy. My phone must be bugging out." The lie was so weak, so insulting, it almost made me laugh. Just then, we heard a second key in the lock. Luke. Of course. They didn't even have the decency to come home separately. He walked in, saw my face, saw Chloe's panic-stricken expression, and immediately knew the show was over. He looked like a man who had just walked off a cliff and was suspended in midair, waiting for gravity to remember he existed. He couldn't even look at me. His gaze was fixed on a spot on the hardwood floor as if it were the most fascinating piece of wood he had ever seen. That was the symbolic image of this entire betrayal. My best friend, standing in my apartment, unable to look at me, brought down not by some grand passion, but by a cheap piece of tracking technology. Then came the twist that revealed the true nature of the disease. Chloe, seeing Luke's weakness, immediately turned on him. She didn't defend their love. She didn't even defend herself. She sacrificed him. "Evan, thank God. Luke he's been going through something. He's been obsessed with me for months. He just got really weird, and I didn't know what to do." I looked at Luke, expecting him to fight back, to say something. He just shook his head. A single, slow, pathetic motion. A tear rolled down his cheek. He had been my brother. And in the space of 30 seconds, she had turned him into a creepy, obsessed stalker to save herself. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had exposed a capacity for cruelty that was breathtaking in its efficiency. Luke finally looked up at me, his eyes full of a despair so absolute it was terrifying. He didn't say a word. He just turned around, walked back out the door, and closed it gently behind him. The soft click echoed in the silent apartment, a sound as final as a gunshot. After Luke left, the silence in the apartment was deafening. It was heavy, filled with the wreckage of Chloe's lie and the ghost of the man who had just evaporated from our lives. Chloe kept talking, her words a frantic, desperate attempt to pave over the crater she'd just created.
She painted a masterpiece of manipulation, depicting herself as the victim, the reluctant object of Luke's pathetic, unwanted affections. It was a compelling performance, I'll give her that. The details were specific, the timeline was plausible. She had clearly been building this narrative for a while, a contingency plan. I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. I became an architect of silence, letting her construct her own prison, brick by verbal brick. I watched her face, a face I once thought I knew better than my own and saw nothing but a stranger. Her performance was fueled by a terrifying brand of narcissism. There was no remorse for betraying me, no concern for the friend she had just emotionally disemboweled. There was only the primal, animal instinct for self-preservation. It wasn't about our marriage. It wasn't about her and Luke. It was only about her. That night, she slept on the couch. Not because I kicked her out of the bedroom, but because she offered it as a theatrical gesture of penance. "I'll give you space," she'd said.
as if space was a solution to a problem that now had its own zip code. The next morning, I did the only thing I could think of to reclaim some small piece of my sanity. I packed a gym bag, told Chloe I was going to try and clear my head, and went to a hotel. The irony was not lost on me. I spent the day in a state of suspended animation. I didn't work. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in a sterile, anonymous hotel room, the quiet hum of the air conditioner the only sound. My phone was a minefield of texts from Chloe. Please talk to me. I love you. We can fix this. And a profound, bottomless silence from Luke. I tried calling him 3 times. Each call went straight to voicemail, a digital dead end. That's when the first tendrils of real fear began to creep in, cold and sharp, cutting through the numb shock. The look on his face when he left wasn't anger. It was an absence, a void. The call came around 9 p.m. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from upstate New York. It was Luke's older sister. Her voice was raw, frayed with a grief so immense I could feel it through the phone. I braced myself for the news that he'd gotten drunk, that he'd been in a fight. I was not prepared for the truth. "He's gone, Evan," she sobbed, her words shattering into a million pieces. "He drove out to the old quarry near our parents' house. He jumped." The world tilted and went silent. The hotel room, the city outside, everything just vanished. The air conditioner hummed on, indifferent. I sank down onto the perfectly made hotel bed. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a drunken mistake. It was a final, declarative act. A full stop. My best friend, my brother, had looked into the abyss Chloe had created for him and decided it was a better option than the world she'd left him in. That was the twist. This was no longer a sad, sordid little story of infidelity. My life had turned into something else entirely. A story with a body count. A tragedy where I wasn't just the wronged husband, I was a survivor. A witness to a crime that had no name, committed by a woman who was currently sleeping on my couch. The image of the 3 of us laughing in that dive bar just weeks ago flashed in my mind, but now it was a macabre, ghoulish mockery. Chloe's lie hadn't just ended a marriage and a friendship. It had become a weapon, and it had just claimed its first victim. There's no instruction manual for what to do next. How do you tell your wife that the man she turned into a villain to cover her affair has just killed himself? Do you do it gently? Do you scream it at her? Is there a greeting card for this specific occasion? "So sorry, your lie got my best friend killed. Thinking of you." In the end, I did nothing. I packed my bag, checked out of the hotel, and walked back into my apartment like a ghost returning to a house that was no longer haunted, just empty.
Chloe was on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a half-empty mug of coffee on the floor. She looked up when I came in, her face a carefully composed mask of weary hope. "You're back," she said, as if I'd just returned from a long day at the office. "Did you clear your head?" The casualness of the question, the sheer, staggering disconnect from the reality of the situation broke something inside me. The cold architectural anger I had been holding on to simply shattered, and what was left was a chasm of pure, desolate emptiness. "Luke's dead," I said. The words fell out of my mouth like stones, heavy and lifeless. "He killed himself. His sister just called me." I wanted to see devastation. I wanted to see horror, regret, a crack in the perfect porcelain facade of her narcissism. What I saw was something far more terrifying. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, processing the information, not as a tragedy, but as a strategic complication. Her first reaction wasn't emotional, it was tactical. I could see the gears turning in her mind. What does this mean for me? How does this change the story? The silence stretched for a full minute. Her first words were not, "Oh my God," or "How could this happen?" They were, Did he leave a note?" The question was so grotesque, so deeply, monstrously selfish, it transcended evil and landed somewhere in the realm of the surreal. She wasn't asking out of grief. She was asking as a co-conspirator, checking for evidence. It was the moment I realized I wasn't married to a person. I was married to a black hole, a void that consumed everything around it, friendship, love, life, to feed its own survival. There was nothing there. No soul, no conscience. From that moment on, I moved through the world on autopilot. I went to Luke's funeral. I stood in a receiving line and accepted condolences from people who looked at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Chloe didn't go. She claimed it would be too hard for Luke's family, that her presence would be disruptive. It was a masterful act of spinning her own self-preservation into a gesture of noble consideration. The symbolic image of those days was Luke's mother, a tiny, frail woman, clutching my hand, her eyes swimming in a grief so profound I thought it would drown her. You were his brother. He loved you so much. The words were a physical weight. Back in New York, the apartment became a mausoleum. We were two strangers orbiting each other in a cold, silent space. The lie was dead between us, but its ghost was everywhere. It sat at the dinner table. It lay in our bed. I started seeing a lawyer. The conversations were clinical, procedural, dividing assets, filing petitions. The mundane logistics of dismantling a life felt like an insult to the scale of the tragedy. One evening, I was in the office, sorting through some of Luke's old mail that had been sent to our address, when Chloe walked in. She had been on the phone, her voice low. As she hung up, a small, involuntary laugh escaped her lips, a sound of genuine amusement. I saw her looking, and her face went blank, but it was too late. I'd heard it. Who do you laugh with, days after burying your lover? Who makes you smile in a house filled with so much pain? The answer I knew was my next horrifying discovery. That laugh echoed in the silence of our apartment for days. It was a sound more violating than any lie she had told. It was a desecration. The laugh of a person who had already moved on, who was looking at a world-ending tragedy as a mere inconvenience, a bump in the road. It became the new mystery, a loose thread I couldn't stop pulling. Who was on the other end of that phone call? Who was the new audience for her performance? My quest for an answer wasn't driven by jealousy. The architect in me had already condemned this entire structure. Now I was just a demolition expert surveying the site before blowing it to smithereens. This was about understanding the full extent of the rot. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was a pathologist performing an autopsy on a dead marriage and a dead man. The answer, when it came, was almost as much of a betrayal as the first one, but in a way that was uniquely pathetic. Our building had a shared resident portal, a clunky website for paying maintenance fees and booking the freight elevator. As I logged in to schedule my move out, a new notification caught my eye. Community bulletin board, mostly posts about lost cats and misdelivered packages. But there was a new thread, started 2 days ago. The subject line was, ISO recommendations, good brunch spots in Tribeca? The author was someone new to our floor,
a guy named Julian, who had moved in across the hall a month ago, and the first reply, time-stamped from the exact time I heard Chloe's laugh, was from her. Her reply was overly enthusiastic, filled with breezy exclamation points. It wasn't the message itself, but the public, cheerful casualness of it that felt so wrong. I thought back. Julian, a slick finance guy with a too-perfect smile and the kind of expensive, minimalist furniture that looks like it's designed to be uncomfortable. I'd seen Chloe talking to him by the elevators a few times. I'd dismissed it as neighborly politeness. Now I saw it for what it was. She was laying the groundwork. She wasn't grieving, she was networking. The final piece fell into place with a soul-crushing thud a few nights later. I couldn't sleep and was walking through the darkened living room when I saw a faint light from under the closed door of the guest room she'd been using. I heard her voice, low and intimate. Believing she was on the phone, I stood there, frozen. And then I heard his voice, a low rumble, responding from inside the room with her. Julian. They weren't on the phone. He was in our apartment, in my home, while I was just a few feet away, mourning the man they had both helped destroy. This was not a new affair born from the ashes of the old one. This was a parallel operation. My mind reeled, recalibrating the timeline. Luke hadn't been an exception. He was just part of a pattern. Maybe he'd found out about Julian. Maybe that's what pushed him over the edge. Not just being betrayed, but realizing he was just another interchangeable part in Chloe's endless selfish machinations. She hadn't just moved on. She had his replacement lined up before his body was even cold. The betrayal wasn't linear. It was a multi-platform, diversified portfolio of deceit. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't confront them. What was the point? You can't reason with a force of nature. A hurricane doesn't care about the homes it destroys. I just walked back to my room, a sense of chilling, almost transcendent calm settling over me. The story I thought I was in, a tragic love triangle, was all wrong. This wasn't a story about love or even lust. This was a story about a parasite, and I was finally seeing its entire horrifying life cycle. The symbolic image was now clear. It was our apartment door, with me on one side, them on the other. For her, it was just a wall separating her present from her past. For me, it was the membrane separating the living from the dead. And I knew my only path to survival was to get as far away from that door as possible. Knowing Julian was in the guest room changed the very air in the apartment. It was no longer a home. It was a hostile territory occupied by two opposing forces pretending the other didn't exist. My morning routine now involved waiting until I heard his door across the hall click shut before I would emerge, a silent, grim dance of avoidance. The days were a countdown, not to a confrontation, but to an escape. My lawyer, a pragmatic woman with zero sentimentality, had laid out the divorce terms. New York is a no-fault state, a legal framework that felt like a cosmic joke in this situation.
Her infidelity, the lies, their direct link to a man's death. None of it mattered in the eyes of the law when it came to dividing our assets. It was a cold, clean cut. This infuriated Chloe. She had expected a fight, a drama, a messy, tearful battle where she could once again paint herself as the wounded party. My detached, businesslike approach robbed her of that platform. My silence and efficiency were my new weapons. She tried to bait me. She would leave Julian's ridiculously expensive watch on the kitchen counter. She would accidentally refer to a restaurant we went to last night, then correct herself. Each one was a small, calculated act of psychological warfare, designed to provoke a reaction, to drag me down into the mud with her. I refused to engage. I treated her like a difficult client on a project I was eager to finish. My indifference was a mirror she couldn't stand looking into because it reflected nothing back. It told her she was irrelevant. The symbolic image of this period became my architectural models. I started spending late nights at the office, losing myself in the clean lines and logical structures of my work. Creating miniature worlds of order and reason was the only antidote to the chaos and moral anarchy of my home life. It was a form of meditation. While Chloe was building a life on lies and impulse, I was building foundations of steel and glass, things that made sense, things that could be trusted to stand. The twist, the moment that finally broke through my cold detachment and reminded me of the true stakes, came from Luke's sister. She called me a week before my move-out date. She had been going through his laptop. "I found the note, Evan," she said, her voice heavy. It wasn't a document. It was in the drafts folder of his email. She forwarded it to me. The draft was addressed to me, but it was clear he never intended to send it. It was a raw, rambling confession and apology, a digital scream. He wrote about his spiraling depression, his loneliness, how Chloe had initiated everything, preying on his vulnerability, making him feel seen for the first time in years. But the final lines were the ones that gut-punched me. And then I found out it wasn't just me. She's with the new guy across the hall, Julian. She was with him before. It wasn't about us. It was a game. I was just a toy she got tired of. Tell my family I'm sorry. Tell Chloe. Tell her she wins. The email confirmed everything I suspected. But seeing it in Luke's own words was like a second death. Chloe hadn't just been cruel. She had been methodical. She had cultivated multiple options, played them against each other. Luke hadn't died because she had broken his heart. He died because she had made him feel worthless, disposable, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The note wasn't a suicide note. It was a final, devastating field report from a soldier betrayed by his own commander. And now I had his last words, his testimony. My cold, silent war of indifference was over. What was my responsibility to this ghost? To his last words? Leaving town wasn't enough anymore. A silent exit felt like a final betrayal of my friend. I couldn't let her win. Not like this. Luke's email changed my entire emotional calculus. The detached architect was gone, and in his place was something harder, colder. The executor of a will for a dead man. His last words, "Tell her she wins," became a mandate in reverse. My mission was no longer to escape, but to ensure that she, unequivocally and publicly, lost. My quiet, dignified exit was off the table. This demolition was going to be loud. It was going to be public. And it was going to be meticulous. The first step was to change the terms of the divorce. My lawyer had drafted a standard separation agreement, a clean 50-50 split of our shared assets, the equity in the apartment, the savings, the investments. It was fair, it was legally sound, and it was no longer acceptable.
The next morning, I sat in her sterile office, the email open on my phone. "I have new information," I said, my voice flat, "and I want to renegotiate." I didn't show her the email. That was my leverage, the ace I would hold until the very last moment. But I explained its contents. I told her about the premeditated nature of the affairs, the calculated cruelty, and the direct line between Chloe's actions and Luke's death. "This is no longer a no-fault divorce," I stated. "This is a wrongful death suit masquerading as a marriage. She is not entitled to half. She is entitled to nothing." My lawyer, a woman who had seen everything, actually leaned back in her chair. For the first time, she saw this not as a divorce case, but as a potential bombshell. We drafted a new offer. It was brutal. I would take 100% of the assets, the savings account, which was primarily my income, the apartment, which I would sell, the investments. I would, in a gesture of magnanimous cruelty, leave her with her personal belongings and the valuable experience she gained. In return for this generosity, I would agree not to pursue any further legal action or release any documents that could cause her significant personal and professional distress. It wasn't a divorce settlement. It was a threat. It was blackmail, polished with the glossy veneer of legalese. The offer was sent. Chloe's reaction was predictable. Outrage, disbelief, a flurry of texts accusing me of being a monster, of trying to ruin her. She immediately lawyered up, hiring a pit bull of a lawyer known for his aggressive tactics. They rejected the offer outright, calling it frivolous and insulting. This was the moment I had anticipated. This was the trap I had set. Her refusal was not a setback. It was step 2 of my plan. They had no idea that my goal was never to get the money. I didn't want it. It was blood money, tainted by everything that had happened. My real goal was discovery. A contested divorce, especially one where one party alleges such extreme circumstances, opens the door to legal discovery, to depositions, to sworn testimony. My pit bull of a lawyer sent out the first round of subpoenas. We subpoenaed her phone records, her bank statements, her emails. But the masterstroke was the final one. We subpoenaed Julian Yangle. The slick finance bro from across the hall was no longer just the new boyfriend. He was now a material witness in a legal proceeding. Chloe's war was based on lies and manipulation in the shadows. I was about to drag everything into the brightest, harshest, most unforgiving light there is. A deposition room, where every word is recorded, transcribed, and spoken under penalty of perjury. She thought she was fighting for money. She was about to find herself fighting for her reputation, her career, her entire constructed reality against the one witness she could never have anticipated. The ghost of a dead man and his final, damning words. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. Her private life was about to become a very public record. The 2 weeks leading up to the depositions were a paper war. Chloe's lawyer, the so-called pit bull, fought exactly as expected. He filed motions to quash the subpoenas, claiming they were a form of harassment, a vengeful tactic designed to intimidate his client. My lawyer, in turn, filed counter-motions, citing the extreme emotional distress and extraordinary circumstances of the case. It was a tedious, expensive, and brutal exchange. But with every motion filed, Chloe was being dragged further out of the shadows and into the harsh, fluorescent light of legal scrutiny. Her fortress of lies was under siege, and she was discovering that charm and manipulation are useless against the cold, hard mechanics of the law. I watched her change. The confident, casual cruelty was gone, replaced by a frantic, brittle energy. She was on the phone constantly, her voice a low, urgent hiss.
Her power had always been in controlling the narrative, in playing people against each other in private. Now, the narrative was being controlled by lawyers, and her private life was about to be itemized, cataloged, and submitted as evidence. She couldn't talk her way out of this. The true turning point, however, wasn't her. It was Julian. The symbolic image of this entire phase became the sterile brown FedEx envelope containing his subpoena. I watched the courier deliver it to his door from my apartment window. A guy like Julian, a man whose entire existence is curated to project effortless success and zero liability, doesn't get subpoenas. He gets stalk alerts and invitations to gallery openings. A legal summons is a stain on his perfect, minimalist life. It introduces risk, complication, and a public record he cannot control. Chloe had become a bad investment, and Julian was about to cut his losses. The first tremor came a few days after he was served. I saw them arguing in the hallway. It was no longer the intimate whispering of lovers. Their body language was tense, hostile. She was pleading, he was dismissive, holding up his hands in a gesture of angry surrender. He was trying to detangle himself from the mess she had created, and realizing it wasn't going to be that easy. She had made him a character in her story, and now my lawyer was demanding he testify about his role under oath. I knew he would break. It was just a matter of when. Luke was loyal, blinded by what he thought was love. Julian was a pragmatist, blinded only by his own ambition. There was no bond there strong enough to survive a legal deposition. My expectation was that he would simply refuse to cooperate, or perhaps get his own high-priced lawyer to make it go away. I had underestimated his cowardice. The text message arrived on a Thursday evening. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew instantly who it was from. The message was short and stripped of all pretense. "This is Julian from 4B. We need to talk, alone. Your wife is insane and she's going to drag me down with her. I'm not going to lie for her in a deposition. I can help you." I stared at the glowing screen. This was it. The weakest point in her fortress was not just cracking, it was actively trying to hand me the keys to the gate. He wasn't just abandoning her. He was offering to become my star witness. She had sacrificed Luke to save herself for me. And now Julian was offering to sacrifice her to save himself from the consequences. The poetic justice was so perfect, so complete, it was almost beautiful. It was the first tremor before the earthquake, and I knew the whole rotten structure was about to come down. I met Julian at a nondescript midtown bar, a place with zero character and perfect for a conversation that never officially happened. He sat across from me looking like a man facing a surprise tax audit. The expensive suit was slightly rumpled, the perfect smile had been replaced by a nervous twitch at the corner of his eye. He offered to buy me a drink. I declined. This wasn't a social call. It was an intelligence extraction. His story came out in a torrent of self-serving justifications and carefully placed blame. He painted Chloe as a master manipulator, a seductress who had misled him. He said he had no idea about the depth of her relationship with Luke, certainly no idea about me until it was too late. It was a weak performance, but I didn't need to believe him. I just needed the information he possessed. "She's a pathological liar," Julian said, his voice low. "When you depose her, she'll make up anything. She'll say you were abusive, that Luke was a stalker, that I forced myself on her, whatever makes her the victim." He took out his phone and slid it across the table. The screen showed a string of text messages. They were from Chloe to him, from the days following Luke's death. They showed no remorse, no grief,